This is a BMS, and I'm going to tell you how to use it and what to do when it stops working. So keep watching, because this could help you save thousands of dollars. Ever since I started a tiny fire in one of my now deceased batteries, I've been using a BMS. If you don't know what a BMS is, it's basically like condoms for batteries. It will help you prevent very expensive mistakes. I have here 4 cells and a BMS. It comes with 2 big wires and a bundle of small ones. Small ones are called balance leads. Depending on the number of cells you have, it will come with that number of wires plus 1. In this case, we have 4 cells, so we have 5 balance leads. And that, my friends, concludes today's math lesson. Moving on. The large gauge wires is used to connect the battery to whatever you need to power, and the balance leads are used to measure the individual cell voltage. The black wire on the balance leads goes to the first cell negative. The first red wire goes to the first cell positive. The second red wire goes to the second cell positive. The third wire goes to the... You know what? I think you get the point. You're a clever bastard. Now let's wire this bad boy up. Now the BMS is connected and the master. Whenever it detects a high or low voltage or a high current situation, it will simply disconnect the battery from whatever is drawing and pushing power to it. If you want to double sleeve your equipment, you can add a temperature sensor and measure for high or low temperatures. I gotta warn you though, if you do that, you could end up being a bit of a boss. And yes, I did wear sunnies for half the video just to make that joke. It's 2 o'clock in the morning here and I'm indoors. Sunnies is a silly item to be wearing, but that is what I do for you guys. Now the BMS is connected and fired up, but how do we know it's actually working? Well, it's easy really. Does it power stuff? If yes, then it's working. You could also measure the terminals of the BMS. If it shows 12 volts or above, then it's working. If you're using a 12 volt system, of course. If it's not showing above 12 volts, then chances are you haven't yelled at it enough. And the slight off chance that yelling at it doesn't solve all your problems, then try adding a 12 volt power supply to the BMS terminals. It sometimes needs a little bit of to wake up. But let's take a closer look at how it's actually working. This particular BMS has a Bluetooth connection, which means that we can see what's going on inside on the smartphone. We can pick up this dirt cheap multimeter, measure the individual cell voltage and confirm that we get the same measurements as the BMS. And in this case we do, which means that we wired up the BMS correctly and it's now taking good care of our lithium cells. That is all fine and good, but how does a BMS actually know that something is wrong, and what does something wrong means to a BMS in the first place? First, we need to define what something wrong is. We do that by setting what is known as parameters. In this case, we're setting high and low voltage cutoff. That basically defines a range where the BMS allows the cells to operate. If one of the cells drops outside this range, the BMS is just going to cut the connection to prevent that cell from being damaged. And that's how the BMS know what something wrong means. And there are many parameters you can set. I won't go through all of them because the list is long. Finding the value to set as a parameter can be a little bit tricky. It both depends on what BMS you have and what kind of cells you have. 99 out of 100 times you can find the information you need in the datasheets for the items you use. And in fact, many of the values for the parameters you want to set is specific to the chemistry. But in this case, as an example, I have found the manual for the DALI BMS and the datasheets for the cells that I'm using. Now it's basically just a matter of following those instructions. I'm not sponsored by Audible, so you have to do all the reading yourself. But it's pretty straightforward. I mean, the numbers are right here. Instead, let's focus on some of the things that can go wrong with your BMS. By far the most common error when wiring up a BMS is the wiring itself, or the BMS is dropped into a fault or protection mode. To demonstrate a faulty wiring, I'm going to switch 2 of the balance leads so we can see how the BMS reacts. As you can see, we get some funky voltages. When we switch the balance leads, the BMS no longer measures the cell voltages correctly, which has triggered it to go into a fault mode. Getting out of a fault mode, or even realizing that you're in one to begin with, can sometimes be a bit tricky. If your BMS doesn't seem to be working correctly, then measure the voltage across the terminals. If it doesn't correspond to your system, then it's probably been triggered by something. Here you have to consult your manual to figure out what has been triggered. Another thing that can happen is a cell voltage dropping outside the range that is specified in the BMS. In that case, you usually have to give it a thumbs up and just a little nudge to know that you love it. If that doesn't do the trick, charge your whole system up again, connect the BMS and see if the same cell drops in voltage. If it does, it's probably about to go bad and you should consider changing that cell. But that leaves a question. How long does or should a cell last for? Well, that depends, and it always depends. It depends on what kind of chemistry you use, how you use it, where you use it. Is it humid? Is it warm? Is it cold? And it basically comes down to a myriad of things. It could be as much as a lifetime, and if you want to know how to make your batteries last that long, then I have a video for you right here. You can just click it. And in that, I'm going to talk about how to make your batteries last 2, 3, 4 times longer using a few very simple tricks, and it will save you money in the long run.